There are 8 things you need to consider before you buy a fruit tree or a bush or a vine that produces for you. Since I did a video on chill hours just a few days ago, I've had a lot of questions about this, so we're going to cover those 8 things. The first thing you need to look at is how cold can it get in your area and that plant still live. So you can put a tree in the ground or a plant in the ground in the spring and it's going to look incredible until the winter time and you have one cold night or 2 cold nights and it's going to kill that plant. So you need to make sure that you know your cold hardiness. Now, how do you know that? All you have to do is look up what growing zone you live in. And there are growing zone maps. So you look at the map, you find where you live, and that'll tell you your growing zone. That'll tell you how cold it gets in your area. So just match your tree to that zone. So most trees, when you buy them, they'll say good for zones 4 to 8, or it's good for zone 7 to 10, something like that. And as long as you are in that area, most of the time you're pretty good. Now, I have had some trouble where I bought some trees or some plants that are supposed to be good for zone 8, and we've dipped a little bit below that. And on those nights, you just have to provide those plants with a little extra protection. So the first thing you need to look at is how cold it can get and that plant still live. It's called the cold hardiness. Number 2, you need to know the plant's heat tolerance. So right here in front of me, this is where we had some raspberries last year. These raspberries were developed in Mississippi and they were supposed to withstand our heat, but they did okay. There's a few that are going to come back. We'll see. They may not do very well. So here's what I've learned. Not only do you have to know how cold it's going to be in your area and if that plant can survive that cold, but you also need to know how hot it's going to be and can those plants withstand that heat and that humidity. If they can't, then it'd be better just to plant something else. Probably what I'm going to do is pull these raspberries. I probably won't have to pull them up because they're going to die. But if they don't die, I'll pull them up and I'll probably put in some boysenberry, maybe a mixture between the blackberry and raspberry, and they'll do a lot better. Best I can do, probably. So check how cold the plant can be and how much heat it can take. The third thing you need to look at is the pollination requirements for your plant. Can they produce fruit on their own by themselves? That's self-pollinating. Or do they need another variety of that same fruit? So for example, I have a pear tree here and I have one here. I also have one here that you can't see. It's behind these elderberry bushes, but it's right here. So I have these are 3 different varieties. So 3 different varieties of pear, and they will cross-pollinate with one another in a form of sexual reproduction. And so you may need a different variety of the same fruit in order for that tree, that plant to set fruit, or you may only need one. So if it says it's self-pollinating, you can have one tree, one plant, and it will make fruit. Or you may need 2. It needs to cross-pollinate. Let me give you another example. I have muscadines, and there are female varieties and there are self-pollinating varieties now. And so if you have a female variety, it cannot produce fruit on its own. You must have a self-pollinating variety so that that self-pollinating variety can pollinate the female muscadine plant to produce fruit. So the third thing you need to know about your plants, are they self-pollinating or do they need to be cross-pollinated with a different variety of the same type of fruit? Since we're talking about temperature, you need to go ahead and talk about chill hours. You need to know how many chill hours your plants need to produce fruit. We've talked about this recently, but let me cover it real quick. Directly behind me is this cherry tree. This cherry tree requires about 900 chill hours to produce fruit. This peach tree here requires about 200 chill hours to produce fruit. It's a big difference. In my area, we get about 650 chill hours every year. So here's what's going to happen. Okay. These trees have a buildup of hormones in different parts of the tree, but a lot of it's in the branches. And as we have those chill hours that's between 32 and 45 degrees, those hormones start to break down. When those hormones completely break down, that's when that plant knows to come out of dormancy. So since we have 650, these hormones in this peach tree break down pretty quickly, and this one comes out of dormancy a lot of times too early, too quickly. So there's a problem. Now here with this cherry tree, it needs 900 and we only have 650, so it never gets enough cold to break down all the hormones in the tree. So it never really completely comes out of dormancy. It does, the leaves, it leaves out, but it's not gonna bloom, and if it does bloom, it's not gonna set fruit because those hormones didn't completely break down. So you need to make sure you know how many chill hours your plant needs for your area. You need to check that out. For us, 650. So what I do now is I look for plants that need 400 to 600 chill hours. That's a pretty good range for us here. So check your chill hours. The next thing you need to consider is the soil condition. What type of soil do you have? And will the plant that you want, will it survive? Will it thrive in the type of soil that you have? Can you amend the soil that you have? Can you make it, condition it to the type that that plant needs? For example, I have blueberries behind me. This is a row of blueberries that I have. When I first put them in, the soil was not very acidic, and I had to make that soil more acidic. So I added sulfur, slow release sulfur, over several years, and now the soil is just right. The pH is correct for those blueberries. So you need to know the pH of your soil. You also need to know, does that soil drain water very good, or does it retain that water? There's not a lot of plants that like wet feet. So if that soil retains water, then those roots can rot. But there are a few that do like wet feet. Mayhaw would be a great example of that. Mayhaw trees, they can really grow in both areas, but originally they were found in swamp areas. And so mayhaw might be a good choice for you. But there's some others. Pear trees, they seem to be okay. They seem to do okay in moist areas too. But you need to know your soil condition and make sure that your soil is in good enough shape or in the right shape for the plants that you're going to put in. The next thing to consider is how much sunlight will that plant get in the area that you want to put it. If it gets 6 to 8 hours, that's considered full sun. Now here where I'm at in zone 8, we get about 14 hours of sun during the longest days of the year, during the summertime. And so in that 14 hours, will the area I want to plant, will it get 6 to 8 hours? I usually make sure it gets at least 7. If it'll get 7 hours, if a plant needs full sunlight, I'll put it there. If it gets less than 7, then I'm going to consider that a shaded area or a semi-shade or dappled shaded area. And I'll put something that can grow in that area. Blackberries are a great example of something that can grow in dappled shade. However, what I would tell you is the more sunlight that a plant can get, especially if it's making fruit, the sweeter that fruit will be, and the more it will produce, the larger the fruit will be. So the more sunlight it can get, the more that it can have, the better it's going to be. So find a good sunny spot for those fruit trees, those fruit vines. And there are a few out there, a few things that will grow in the shade. Just know they won't produce as much. The fruit won't be as large or as sweet. But consider how much sunlight they'll get. The 7th thing you need to consider is disease and pest in your area. What kind of diseases do you have? What kind of pests did you have? And when you buy varieties of the plant, the fruit plant or the fruit tree that you want, make sure that it's resistant to that disease or that pest. For example, we have a lot of fire blight here where I'm at, and so when I buy pear trees, I make sure I buy a pear tree that is fire blight resistant. And if you want a plant that's not resistant to that fire blight, or you know that there is pests in the area that love that plant, you just need to know that ahead of time so you know that you're going to have to spray. You're going to have to spray for disease and for pest. You're going to need to know what kind of sprays to get. You're going to need to know when to spray and how to spray those plants. So make sure you consider the disease and the pest in your area. The eighth thing, the last thing to consider, is the size of the tree. The area that you have, how big can the tree be, or how big do you want it to be? So if you buy a tree, you put it in the ground and you don't tend to it at all, it could be several feet high, higher than you could even collect the fruit, and it defeats the purpose of why you want it. There's two ways to really control the size if you want a smaller tree. Now bushes and vines, of course, you can keep them the size that you want them for the most part. But for trees, there's two ways that you can keep them small or shorter, okay? 6 to 10 foot, high enough for you to reach the fruit. The first one is buy a tree on the right rootstock. For example, this peach tree here is a miniature peach tree. I don't have to prune it if I want to keep it to size. It's only going to be about 6 foot, maybe 10 foot at the most. That's as big as it's going to get because of the rootstock. Now, I do prune it. Obviously, I prune it so that the production can be better, so that it can be an open vase. I also prune out any kind of disease or deadwood. So I do prune it, but I don't have to prune it for size. However, if you got a tree, and even if it's not on a dwarfing rootstock or a miniature rootstock, you could still prune that to size. You could keep it 6 to 10 foot easily, but you're gonna have to prune it often. Usually for me, I've had to prune twice a year. I do a winter pruning and also do a summer pruning to keep it to the right size for those plants that are not miniature or dwarf. So know what size you want, know the type of tree that you're going to get, what's the characteristics of that tree, how tall is it going to be. If it's on a certain type of rootstock, how tall is that rootstock going to allow it to get. And if you're going to have to prune it all the time, know that ahead of time. You may want to do that anyway. And if you do, just know it's just going to be an extra chore during the year to make sure that it stays to size. So those are the 8 things you need to look at when you buy a tree. Make sure that the tree that you buy is within all those ranges, or in that ranges of all 8 of those, for you to be successful. Trust me, I've learned the hard way. If your tree or your plant does not meet one of those 8 characteristics for your area, it's just not going to do well. But I'm not one to shy away from a challenge. I have pushed my zone. I have tried things that aren't supposed to grow here, and for the most part, the experts were right. But every once in a while, you get a surprise. So don't be scared to try things. But when you try them, make sure you buy those plants on sale. That way, if they die, you haven't lost a whole lot. 8 things. Make sure your plants meet those 8 things.